Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today I'm going to be counting down 10 rock and metal albums that don't deserve the hate, Volume 2. That's right, this video is a sequel to a topic I covered about a year ago here on the channel, counting down during Volume 1 here, 10 rock and metal albums I don't feel deserve the hate, right? Underrated, overlooked rock and metal albums, in my opinion, and you can see that list right over here, just so there are no repeats on this list. And if you want to hear more of my thoughts on these albums right here, definitely go check out the part 1 video I did last year. I'll leave the link to it in the comment section below. But today, here are 10 more overhated rock and metal albums that I feel definitely don't deserve the hate. So that said, let's get started here with my number 10. Let's kick things off here with my number 10. I'm going to go with Fly on the Wall by AC/DC from 1985. Here's an album that I think its main detractor is the production, right? Produced by Angus and Malcolm Young. I will even admit AC/DC have sounded a lot better in the studio in the past here, and the production is not nearly as crisp as I would have liked it, but nevertheless here, I do really love the rawness of this record, and even though it's not quite on par with some of their earlier 80s works, I think every AC/DC album from the 80s gets compared to Back in Black, which is pretty unfair. This is still a very strong record, in my opinion, with a lot of interesting and intriguing standout tracks, like Fly on the Wall, the title track, Shake Your Foundations, right, Sink to Pink, Stand Up, Hell or High Water, Back in Business is great. It's such an explosive chorus to it, and Send for the Man to close things out. I dig this album. Is it top shelf AC/DC? Probably not, but nevertheless here, a very solid release by the band that gets written off by a lot of people, mainly for the production, but for my money, it's still a very strong record, and live as well was great. The tour for this album is fantastic, one of my favorite AC/DC tours because of just how raw they sounded on this tour, right? Very no thrills, down to business rock and roll. So that's pretty much all you could ask for AC/DC, in my opinion, and they do deliver with that here on this record. So in my opinion, a pretty underappreciated album, and one that gets a lot of hate, mainly for the production, but I'm able to overlook that just for the sake of some of these stronger tracks on here. So that said, coming in at number 10, we have Fly on the Wall by AC/DC from 1985. Following that up here with my number 9, I'm going to go with Black Rain by Ozzy Osbourne from 2007, and it's very easy for a lot of people to write off Ozzy's 21st century works because a lot of them sound very similar. It's a very, as I've described it in the past, a tried and true formula, so why stray from that? But the one outlier, in my opinion, the one album that really stands out in his catalog from the 21st century for my money has got to be Black Rain. I absolutely love the riffs on here. It's really heavy. You've got some great lyrics as well that border from anthemic to really angry stuff here by Ozzy, right? He sounds great on lead vocals, and I think the production here is really stellar as well. So when it comes to this record, even though, again, a tried and true formula when it comes to Ozzy's more recent works, it's still a very, very strong album that I would put up against some of his best work. Obviously, it's not, in the top 3 best Ozzy Osbourne albums of all time, but I would have it somewhere in the top 7, maybe the top 5, depending on how I'm feeling on that particular day. But for my money, it's a very strong record that gets overlooked by a lot of people. Some great standouts here, like Not Going Away, I Don't Want to Stop, Black Rain, the title track, right? You've got The Almighty Dollar, really heavy stuff there, great lyrics on that track. 11 Silver, Civilize the Universe, Countdown's Begun, and Trapdoor to close things out. Hands down my favorite album from 2007, and just a killer record all around here by Ozzy. Coming in at number 9 on the list, got to go with Black Rain. Next, number 8 now, I'm going to go with The Reconstruction of Light by King Crimson from 2000. And, I'll be the first to say that the Reconstruction of Light album is a definite step down from the previous record, 1995's Thrack. But, for my money here, it's still a really interesting album that marks the debut of the double duo lineup here and sees the band continuing to experiment and take chances in the studio, dabbling in what can best be described as industrial prog. And while that might be a turnoff for some people, I appreciate the band's consistent nature throughout their entire catalog to evolve and experiment, and with standout tracks on here like the Atlantis Prozac Blues, right? You have the 8-minute title track, and Lark's Tongues and Aspect Part 4. This record has its moments of brilliance, in my opinion, and as the band moves into the 21st century here, they do it as only they could. So for me, I think it's a really underrated record. Gets a lot of hate from the King Crimson fan base, regarded as one of their worst, but in my opinion, I think it's a really enjoyable record, and I can absolutely commend the band for their experimentation moving into the 21st century in 2000 with a Reconstruction of Light. I'm going to stick with prog here for my number 7 and go with Atom Heart Mother by Pink Floyd, a record that's been panned by both Roger Waters and David Gilmour, so if anything else, it's managed to achieve the impossible, and that's to get Roger and David to agree on something. But I'll definitely admit it's not quite up to par with some of the classic Floyd material that would very soon follow throughout the 70s, but when examined as a psychedelic piece, as well as the band taking great strides in the evolution of their sound, mixing elements of prog and psychedelia, it's much more enjoyable listen simply for its significance in the Floyd catalog. Of course, when I look at the track listing here, Adam Heart Mother is a really interesting track, right? A great psychedelic piece in its own right. Really interesting stuff there. If is a great Roger Waters deep cut, in my opinion, right? You have Summer of 68, Fat Old Son, and then Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, which is interesting to say the least, right? And like I said before, this whole album best listened to if examined as, a psychedelic piece mixed with elements of progressive rock as well, which would be so important to the future of Pink Floyd. So definitely a very significant album in their catalog, and one that I think gets a lot of hate from a lot of people, and it's not necessarily warranted, even though the band themselves aren't big fans of the record. It's easy to say that Black Sabbath's classic string of albums ended in 1975 with Sabotage, but, in my opinion, it continues through 1976 with the great technical Ecstasy. Now, while it might not be as strong as Sabotage or any of the albums that came before it, it's still a very enjoyable record here, even though the band were falling apart at the seams, right? Strung out at this point, exhausted, tired, creatively burnt out, they still deliver here with a really interesting record, with some standout tracks that I enjoy, like You Won't Change Me, It's Alright, featuring Bill Ward on lead vocals, really interesting stuff there, right? You have Gypsy, All Moving Parts Stand Still, Rock and Roll Doctor, very Kiss-like, but still an enjoyable track nonetheless, She's Gone, and Dirty Women, the absolute classic to close things out here, so it definitely has its moments of greatness and classic Sabbath on here, so for me, I would consider this album to be part of that great string of albums they had from their debut all the way up until 1976's Technical Ecstasy. Of course, that streak would be broken with Never Say Die soon after, but for my money, this is part of that great streak of albums, and I really dig it. Moving on now into the top 5. For my number 5, I'm going to go with Flush the Fashion by Alice Cooper from 1980. Alice, at this point, was more worse for wear, digging, further down into his addiction to drugs and alcohol. You can see him on the back looking pretty rough at this point, but, it's Alice trying his hand at a more new wave type of sound, and it is a definite step down from the great From the Inside from 1978, but in my opinion, as a hardcore Alice Cooper fan and an Alice Cooper deep cut snob, not a total swing and a miss here by Alice Cooper, in my opinion, even though it didn't do him any favors in terms of his commercial success. There are some really enjoyable deep cuts on here with some really interesting lyrics as well, like Clones, Pain, Leather Boots, Aspirin Damage, Nuclear Infected, Grim Facts, Model Citizen is a lot of fun, Dance Yourself to Death, and Headlines to close things out. Some really enjoyable stuff on here. Not a long album. The tracks on here are pretty short, but for my money, again, I do love a good Alice Cooper deep cut, and this album is full of them. So for me, I enjoy it, and, I don't get a lot of the hate that this album gets, even though, I understand that Alice's material would begin to, diminish and decline in the early 80s due to his drug and alcohol addiction. I still think this record is pretty solid. In 1996, Glenn Danzig made the puzzling decision to move to a more industrial-tinged sound here with Danzig V, Black Acid Devil, and I'll be the first to say, like I've been saying for a lot of these albums, it's a definite step down in the sense that it's not nearly as good as his first 4 solo records. I mean, those 4 are essential Danzig material, and well, this album might not necessarily be essential. I definitely do commend Danzig for, trying something different here, and stepping outside of his comfort zone, possibly due in part to the success of The Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails in 1994, Danzig trying his hand here with more industrial sound, doing his best Trent Reznor impression on this record. You can see him on the back. Looks a lot like the Grinch on that picture, which is pretty funny. But when I look at the track listing here, there are a lot of enjoyable songs, like Seventh House. The title track, Black Acid Devil, is great, right? You have an awesome cover of Hand of Doom by Black Sabbath, and Sacrifice, which is very Nine Inch Nails-esque, but I really enjoy it. I'm a big Nine Inch Nails fan. I like industrial, and I think Danzig should be commended for taking a chance here in the studio and doing something a bit more out of his comfort zone with a Black Acid Devil here from 1996. Is it essential Danzig? Not really, but nevertheless, an enjoyable record, in my opinion, that gets way too much hate from a lot of people. We break into the top 3 now with every Carcass fan's least favorite album of theirs, that is Swansong from 1996. A polarizing record for sure that can best be described as a death and roll album, marking a departure from the previous gore, grind, and death metal works, but still, this album has its moments and marks an interesting period in the band's history, in my opinion, and while it's not their best album, I can still appreciate songs on here like Keep on Rotting in the Free World, Black Star, Cross My Heart, and Tomorrow Belongs to Nobody. And now, despite its mixed reviews at the time and the fact that it was released in the same year as Load by Metallica, another album that marked a radical change, it still managed to age pretty well, in my opinion, and certainly isn't an album that I dislike. It's certainly not an album that I hate by any means. I think it's aged pretty well, and despite being polarizing in their catalog, has some really strong, enjoyable stuff on it. We love the cat, Peter Criss, here on this channel, and coming in at number 2, I'm going to go with his 1978 solo album here. Of course, Kiss released 4 solo albums simultaneously in 1978, which was a huge marketing disaster for them, but seemed like a good idea at the time, I guess. Nevertheless, the albums didn't chart particularly well. Ace's did the best, but Peter's is regarded as one of the worst, probably the worst out of the 4 by a lot of people, but for me, I have a lot of unpopular opinions about those 78 solo albums, and one of the biggest ones is that behind Aces, this is my second favorite solo album from 1978 from the band here. I think Peter does a great job of, incorporating a lot of his own personal influences here, great elements of jazz, funk, R&B, right, rhythm and blues. So really interesting here that Peter Criss was able to incorporate so many outside influences and elements on here that made it sound so different and stand out amongst the 4 solo albums. I think it'd be pretty monotonous if all 4 of those records sounded exactly the same, sounded exactly like a Kiss album, so for this album to be so different, I think is a great job by Peter Criss, and he does a fantastic job on lead vocals here, as well as on the drums. Peter's drumming abilities get dismissed by a lot of people, but I think he's a really unique drummer, and I enjoy his playing, and I enjoy his work here on this record, with some standout tracks being I'm Gonna Love You, You Matter to Me, Tossin' and Turnin', Don't You Let Me Down, right? You've got Hooked on Rock and Roll, and I Can't Stop the Rain to close things out. Really, really great stuff here by Peter Criss from 1978 on his solo album. Although a lot of people tend to dismiss this record, I really enjoy it, and it's my second favorite out of the 4 1978 solo albums released. And finally, coming in at number 1 here, I'm going to go with their Satanic Majesties Request by the Rolling Stones. Now, I absolutely love this album, even though a lot of Stones fans tend to dismiss it or put it down towards the bottom of their list. I love the experimentation the band take on this album. It's very much in the same vein as, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles, seeing that the band are experimenting here more and more in psychedelia, but, I don't think it's nearly as good as Sgt. Pepper, but very similar all the way down to the album cover here. But looking at the track listing here, there are some really great tracks on here, like Sing This All Together, Citadel I love, 2000 Man, She's a Rainbow, right, The Lantern, Gomper, 2000 Light Years from Home, On With the Show. Some great tracks on here, some killer Stones deep cuts in my opinion, and even though it's the band straying from their natural evolution of their sound and trying something, a bit out of the ordinary for them, I really dig it, I really enjoy it, and if anything, I commend the Stones for taking such a chance in the studio when they didn't have to, But a fantastic record here in my opinion, and my unpopular Rolling Stones opinion is that this is my favorite Stones album of all time, bar none. I love this record to death, and I think it's a really, really strong album that gets overlooked by a majority of the Stones fan base when, in reality, like I said, it's got some great deep cuts on here and some really innovative material. So that wraps up part 2 of albums that don't deserve the hate, which should be visible right over here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you never miss a new upload, and let me know down in the comments what are some of your favorite underrated or overlooked albums of all time. I'd be very interested in hearing your opinions, and let me know, would you be interested in seeing a part 3, a volume 3 here of this series? I'd love to, talk some more about some overlooked albums because there are plenty more to talk about, believe me. So if you want to see more of this, please let me know down in the comments section below. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.